Welcome back, everybody. We're sitting here today on Empower You TV talking to Dr. Jeremy Ayers and India Merkerson of the Naturally Better Healing Centers. And going back to Jeremy, you were talking to us about the difference between basically what a doctor of osteopathy was and how this relates to what you're doing now with the Naturally Better Healing Centers. So complete
Yes,
your
thank
thought.
you. Hopefully I fixed my mic and my voice will hold out because I'm having a little cleanse myself. But what I hopefully am sharing with people, excuse me, is the fundamental philosophical difference. And they are completely opposed to allopathic medicine. Now, most people will want to be natural. Who wouldn't want to be natural? But what we find is that as soon as some critical diagnosis is given, they can't run quickly enough to the doctors, usually through fear. And by the way, the word diagnosis is made up of the word di-ag-nosis. Well, di means two, ag means not, and gnosis means to know. So you've got two people not knowing what the hell's going on. And that's the doctor and the client. And when you've been doing what I've been doing for so long, and you take case histories, and I have to say if at this point, because if people are listening and don't know this, I do. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. The reason we have such a high success rate is because it's correct. Otherwise, it wouldn't be working. It's not me. I've been taught the true laws that aren't based on how much money I can make. It's about what's right, right? So we take these case histories, and when you get a diagnosis and you're given a suppressive, and that's really what allopathic medicine is. It's not designed to cure. It never was. It's to treat. And to treat means to stop the symptoms. So people feel better, and then they go away and they go back into their busyness. They go back to being human doings and not human beings. Now, a naturopathic doctor, a true naturopathic doctor, will want to be understanding their story of how they got here. And if they're very seriously unwell, it means always that they have walked along their life collecting levels of toxicity. Their body's becoming more and more toxic. They've been unable to excrete it through the normal routes of eliminations. And so to protect life, which is what the body's main function is, it will store the toxicities, and at certain times throughout a year, which we'll get into later on, it will try and have attempts to release it. This is why people are often getting sick all at once, and they're going, there's something going around. Okay, it's normally to do with the phases of the moon and the seasons, which we're getting. Oh my God, he talked about moons. I was following him all the way, and then he went off and talked about moons. But moons are incredibly important in this picture, and we can, you know,
Yes,
and this is true science, right? True science. But anyway, so so a naturopath would want to understand what the body tried to do, how it was stopped, and it can be suppressed by natural medicine as well if it's being practiced allopathically, because we need to help the body do what it's doing and not stop it, and then how it's got to the level it is now. So there's something called the Herring's law of cure, which is infallible as far as I'm concerned. And the Herring's law of cure is that dis-ease will clear from the head down, move from major organs that keep you alive, to minor organs. It will go from inside out, so we're looking for excretions and rashes and mucus and stuff coming out, you know, normal routes of elimination, and in the reverse order in which it came. Hence why the case history is so important, because when we start treating people, they will usually revisit many episodes of the disease they've had before, and it will come out, and it's a beautiful thing to follow and track as their health improves. Okay, so that leads us to, you're not sick, you're toxic. And if you grasp that understanding, if you go to an allopathic doctor who does not understand that and sees it as something to be stopped and treated, they are just adding to the toxic picture. Because if you can name one medicine that isn't toxic by their own data, I'm all ears. And we're taking from the extreme chemotherapy, which is a bastardization of language if ever I've heard one, Because if we're going to be honest, and this is the time now on this planet to start being honest, we have to start with language. It is not chemotherapy. It is cell-killing poison. And when we start calling it that, it changes the picture. Now, if we start to critically think, and we take someone at that level of terrible health, cancer, if I give somebody chemotherapy, cell-killing poison, it will make them extremely sick and a very good chance of killing them. And it is extremely well documented that it will most likely give them cancer. Well, if that's going to make a healthy man sick, how on God's earth, or whatever earth it is, built by whoever, can it make a sick man healthy? It can't and never will. And anyone who has had these treatments and survived, I strongly argue you survived in spite of the treatment. And we could then talk about whether you've actually cleared the causes in the first place, which we'll go on later on. So it's very, very critical that the philosophical ways we look at it are very different, and therefore they dictate very differently. And I'm well known for it. Once you start going into fevers and cleanses, and I'll be smiling. They'll be suffering for 2 or 3 days, and I'll be going, this is fantastic.
And that's something you hit on, Jeremy, that I think that it's really important that everybody can identify with in you elucidating how we think backwards towards these cleansing sorts of things that our bodies are doing. You talk about fevers. Every parent deals with a fever. If you go to the doctor, I know I've got children as old as 23 down to grandchildren that are 3 and 4, and they're still saying the same thing. Any fever, 99 degrees and up, you're meant to feel them every 3 hours, alternate between Motrin and ibuprofen. And this can go on for days and days at a time. Is that the way that you think, Jeremy? I mean, that's something that everybody can identify with. Maybe they'll get it.
Well, to answer that question, again, you have to give a greater understanding of why everybody knows that's what to do. Why does all parents panic? Because they're programmed to panic when the temperature goes up. When their child's sick, they panic. We didn't used to panic, but most mothers, they'll be in fear and, oh my God, he's got a fever and I must get to where did this come from? Now, if you start looking at the bigger picture, and I'm sure the audience is familiar with this, but if they're not, it may be a bit of a surprise. But this world currently has not been set up to benefit you. And the last thing on this planet is a healthy, critically thinking, educated populace. Because if we did have a critically thinking, vibrantly healthy, creative human beings, as opposed to human doings, because you were not born to work your ass off just to get by, you were meant to be a creative being. If we had that, things would be very different on this planet. We would have governance and not governments, where in governance they are working to serve you. Whereas right now, if you can argue with me that we're not working for them, I need to see the evidence, because it just ain't happening. So if you start to understand that concept of the game, you must keep the people sick and tired. Because if they're sick and tired, they don't rebel, they don't educate, they don't get up. And in between that, you must keep them busy. And then in between that, you must keep them entertained. Now, that's the Orwellian world you're in right now. So what better place to start than school and educating you stupid? Yes, I'm sorry if that upsets some of you out there with your degrees and what have you. But, you've been educated stupid. And so you've been told to be in fear. I mean, let's go back a bit before we get to the kids' fever, okay? Most mothers will still believe vaccination or immunization is the best possible thing they can do for the thing they love more than their own life. And I understand that, because they've been told, and David Icke, and I know Roger loves David Icke, and I adore David Icke, if everybody knows something, it's for a reason, right? Oh, God, he mentioned David Icke. Yes, you go, David. Rock on. I get to talk to you one day. Maybe drink a gin and tonic, I hear. But anyway, so, okay, you've been told vaccination is the best thing you can do for this creature that you love beyond your own life, which is what most mothers feel. You know, not every mother for different reasons, but most mothers would do anything to protect and support their child. Well, go and ask most mothers what are in those 36 vaccinations, and they will go, I don't know. Go and ask your doctor what's in those vaccinations, and he will probably go, I don't really know. There's some this and that. Okay, right. That I have a huge problem with from the beginning. If you don't know what's in something, how can you make a decision that this is going to be beneficial for your child? Remember, at the most vulnerable stage of its life after coming out the womb, you're now going to inject something into it and you haven't got a clue. Well, I argue, if I go out on the streets now and go, I've got this little injection here, it's going to hurt. They're going to try and tell you it's a small prick. Well, that's most doctors, but they can tell you it's a small prick, but it's not. It's going to hurt, and that's the first lie because it always hurts. Can I inject it in you? It's going to do you real good. They would fight me not to put it in them. But we trust these people with zero knowledge. Now, when you start to tell them, well, did you know that in most vaccinations, there is a preservative called thimerosal, which is something like, I forget the figures, 50,000 times more mercury than is safe, acceptably safe, not there's any safe level. They go, huh? You know, so also there's aluminum. Well, it's aluminium, but you North Americans pronounce everything wrong.
Remember, we speak American. We don't.
I was gonna say that. That's not what it's called here.
Aluminum.
And, yes, aluminium. And they go, huh? And
It's like you even added letters into that. Like, what?
There's a new element. I didn't know that.
Do you know there's formaldehyde? And they go, huh? Do you know that there's aborted fetal tissue? Well, that really starts to, and they go, no, it's not possible. Well, it's the truth. And if I argue very strongly, if you showed mothers what was in these things and said to them, no matter what level of education they are, how can putting mercury into your baby, let alone any of these things, I know some cynics will say, well, there's some vaccines without mercury, but go and look at the other ingredients. How can that possibly improve this young living creature's immune system? Please explain to me the logic. Well, it just can't. But what it does do is set up the first level of toxicity. By the way, babies are now being born into this world, and in the meconium, they're finding over 200 chemicals, including DDT, regularly. So they're being born at a toxic level, which was never imagined 200 years ago. So what we frequently see, particularly after the first vaccinations, and that's if the children don't suddenly go down into an obvious, vaccine damaged state, is they normally see fevers and flus and colds quite soon after. And this is when we start educating mothers, that's their baby's first attempt to try and get rid of this shit. That's when they'll run to the doctor, Pamol, maybe some antibiotics, and then we begin the cycle of dis-ease. And so when we take a case history, very often people have been chronically ill all their life, and you see I'm getting a lot of young people really, really ill. And when you take the case history, it started back here. And so this is absolutely fundamental. So when you say, how would you treat a baby's fever or a young child's fever? You manage the fever, because the baby is trying to throw up a fever to burn and break down these toxins and release it. And if you manage it and keep their temperature down, keep their head cool and keep them cool, the good old-fashioned stuff, those babies will come out better than before. And anybody who wants to argue they all I think if you critically start to investigate, which most don't, the children that have died before and previously were treated with medicine, and that's why you got a lot of fatalities, because it took their toxicity way down, and then they went into a fatal position, in my humble research.
So, Jeremy, what would you say then about these major diseases? These vaccines, came from a purpose, which was to combat things like polio and pertussis and measles, etc. So is there a better way for us to deal with those diseases than the vaccines that we've traditionally used? Or is there a better vaccine that we could be making? What do you do, in your opinion, about eradicating those major diseases?
Well, it's an excellent.
Story told you, Jan. You went for it.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And it gets back down to being, you know, the fundamental core truths. And so we have to look at that. I'll explain that in a moment as simply as I can.
Okay.
But if you take something like polio, polio is one of the great examples of smoke and mirrors, and to redirect you that way. Polio is a direct result of DDT poisoning. And to cover things up like that, and we're just treating someone right now, actually, who all her problems began when she got polio in the United States, or United Inner State of America currently, until these people wake up and start, you know, being good Americans again. But anyway, all her problems started at 12 when she had got polio, and then post-polio trauma, or whatever it's called, and then all the treatment she had after that. And I asked her, and she's in her 60s or 70s now, and she's very, very sick. And this is a beautiful example, actually, of the case history, and you can see, but perfectly healthy girl, bam, polio at 12. And I said to her, I said, well, by any chance, did you have exposure to DDT? Oh, my goodness, they were spraying us. They were actually physically spraying our bodies. It was a bit of a joke.
With DDT?
Yes. America has a history.
Oh yeah, I put pictures on our blog when we shared it. Yeah.
They were spraying for the mosquitoes, DDT, and they'd have the children run through it and all kinds of things. This is what the polio is. They then dump the DDT in third world countries, and it gets into the water tables. And this is what these diseases. So when I say you're not sick, you're toxic, we've made a massive assumptions on what we've been told, and you need to question the sources of what you've told in the first place. Okay, so a lot of these cases is basic chemical poisoning that manifests a specific box of symptoms that they then label polio. Now, people will go, but what about the virus? You know, what about the bacteria connected to it? It's an excellent question. Most people, well, actually I say most people, but I'm shocked at how many people, even in their 40s, have never heard of Louis Pasteur. But I thought most people have heard of Pasteur. They've heard of pasteurization of milk, and right? Well, it comes from Louis Pasteur. What most people don't realize is the whole of modern medicine's theory is based on the germ theory come up with by Louis Pasteur. Now, what they almost certainly don't know is Louis Pasteur had a intellectual sparring partner. It's a bit like a Rocky movie, really, but intellectual levels. Imagine Clubber Lang as Louis Pasteur and Rocky Balboa, I guess, but intellectually. A chap called Antoine Beauchamp, who was a genius. And what Antoine Beauchamp realized, and he really was a genius because his level of microscope is just so inferior compared to what we now have, he recognized that there's this tiny organism, the smallest unit of life, which he called a microzyme, other people's called a somatid, absolutely minute living body of life. And as the environment changed. It literally morphed into different and more complex life forms. And he was able to document this going into bacteria, viral, yeast, and up to fungus. And then as the environment changed, it went back. And so he said, the microbe is nothing. The environment is everything. Pasteur plagiarized his material, got it wrong, and said the microbe is everything, the terrain is nothing, and that launched the war against microbes. Okay? Now, through modern times, the microscopes and several brilliant people have advanced to the level now that it's been videoed. These microzymes, which build all living material, it is literally almost the divine himself, because it's taking the ether, it's taking the minerals, the inorganic minerals and the non-living matter, and making it into life, and it's the formation of life with other forces created. But nonetheless, they videoed it going through 16 major stages, there's many more minimal ones, into bacteria, virus, yeast, and fungal, right? Now, when you've seen this, you understand, and it changes as the environment changes. So when you come to me and say, this disease has been wiped out, or this disease, no, it hasn't. That disease came about because the environment was dramatically changed internally, that a bacteria or a viral started to proliferate. And that's what they focused on. So they said, here's the virus, that's what's causing it. But as a matter of fact, it was the environment. Now you have to dig deeper and look at what was changing the environment. And through the Industrial Revolution and other things, it was sugar and then a mass implant of chemicals and other things. But if your environment isn't correct, the disease, you could put the bacterial virus in there and it's not going to proliferate because it's the wrong environment. Think about your animals, people. If bacteria and viruses truly caused disease as opposed to being present, my dogs should have been dead years ago. They're filthy animals. They don't wash their hands, they lick their butts, they bury things in the ground, they dig them up and they're festering and they eat them and they're vibrantly well. What's going on? All right? So it's a fundamental thing. So medicine has taken a war from a miscorrect theory. And the more you suppress and try and kill that virus and kill that bacteria, the more it morphs. Now, if you look honestly at today, and you answer me, Janet and Roger, is the world in general populace healthier or sicker than 100 years ago?
Before we answer that question, we're going to take a break.
Okay.
And then we'll come back and get into that.
Okay.
So we'll be right back.